Hello today, my dear players. Today, I wanted to talk about some anime power systems that I really appreciate. I might end up making multiple videos on the subject. We'll just have to see how long this video goes out to be and how many I cover. But something I've noticed with a lot of different shonen, especially shonen power systems, is that each one is good at doing something specific in that, and like the way the power system relates to the show is different. Like they all relate to battle in some way, obviously, but there's also some type of additional benefit that is attempting to be explored with the power system that I think is very interesting. The first one that I'll start with is Bleach. Bleach's power system has multiple ways it's expressed throughout the different races in the show, but the one I'll focus on is the Zanpakuto system for Soul Reapers, where everyone has a Shikai and a Bankai, and the abilities of the Zanpakuto are these direct expressions of a person's personality in some sense. I love this thoroughly because it's basically free. It's basically just free character development. It's free storytelling expressing the type of person that a Soul Reaper is via their Zanpakuto. It's so good to me. I love it. A lot of people have some qualms about certain things that happen with Zanpakuto throughout the series, but I think something that's important to think about with them is that Zanpakuto are just as bendable and flexible as a concept as a person's personality. Because of that, any set of rules that you can think of for Zanpakuto and any set of can be just as easily bended and moved as the rules for a person's personality. And I think that helps explain a lot of the oddities that appear throughout the show and manga. One of the most interesting examples of one of these oddities is Kenpachi, in that spoiler alert for 1,000 Year Blood War arc, if you haven't watched, well, I don't know if it's been animated yet. It's something that happened in the manga. But yeah, if you don't want to get manga spoilers for 1,000 Year Blood War arc, do not continue. But one of the best things that they show with Kenpachi is that his Zanpakuto actually managed to split away from him a little bit into another person that is Yachiru. And Yachiru is their own person with their own Zanpakuto ability, which I have my own theories about, but yeah, it's so fascinating. And a lot of people, I've seen, not everyone, it's not even most, but there's a lot of people I've seen discussions around that get really hung up on this idea. And I think it's just because Zanpakuto as a concept are that flexible. They really are. And it's just so interesting to me. But that doesn't really talk about the power system itself. That just talks about an oddity that can appear. But the way in which you can kind of infer how different aspects of Zanpakuto express a person's personality is fascinating to me. Like, example would be the 3rd Division Vice Captain, or Lieutenant, if you prefer that wording, Kira. Kira's Zanpakuto Wabiske is such an interesting power that is such an interesting expression of his personhood. This idea that his own sense of depression, his own sense of burden that he has on himself, that his sword is able to essentially inflict that onto others by just doubling the weight of anything it hits. And it's quite, I love it. I just love the expression. I'm sorry. The most obvious example we have of expression is, well, the most apparent one that we explore a lot is Ichigo. Although it's a little murky, considering how complicated his dynamic with his Zanpakuto is. But I still think that there is a lot that we can get from the core, from the ability of Getsuga Tensho. This ability to take a bit of his own energy, amplify it within the sword, and then release it. I think there is something that can be said about how there is an expression of a part of Ichigo. This idea that Ichigo has a desire to be stronger, a desire to fight, even. Something that's kind of in him in such a degree that even he doesn't realize it. Hence, the real Zangetsu, but we'll call him White for now. The what we thought was his inner hollow for so long. It's something White points out to him a lot, in that even with the unique dynamics of how White came to be within Ichigo, even then, White still has to represent something very real in Ichigo's personality. And I think it is genuinely this desire to get stronger and this desire to be better. And so, White manifests as this almost antagonistic force, constantly pushing him to try and fight harder and be better. And even while doing that, he protects him. It's great. I think it's wonderful pieces of writing that manage to stand on their own just by expressing the abilities and actions taken. And I think you can also infer some interesting things about other characters. Like, Renji is a particularly interesting case study. It's something that kind of gets forgotten after the arc is introduced, but it's actually mentioned that Zabimaru, the Shikai form of Zabimaru, is the hardest pure martial Zanpakuto to master. Like, there's some, just this idea of it functioning the way it does, and the way it kind of straightens out like a whip and bounces around everywhere. It is considered the most difficult sword to learn how to master, due to this strange nature in which it functions. And yet Renji uses it rather masterfully, at least the Shikai. And I think there's something to be said about how Renji, this person with a certain sense of pride in himself, I think pride is a big thing that he carries through about himself going forward, that the way Zabimaru kind of expressed is in a baseline, without even getting into whatever deeper meaning that his Bankai holds. Just as a baseline in his Shikai is almost a challenge to Renji, a challenge for him to master something difficult. And I think that's a very interesting dynamic between his Zanpakuto and him, in that his Zanpakuto is almost purposefully obtuse and difficult as a way for Renji to, almost as a way to make Renji figure out how to use it. And this is even further reinforced when we learn later on. And again, I don't know if this is animated, so this might be spoilers for 1000 Year Blood Work. But when we learn later on that the Bankai that he's had for so long, Hihiro, I think it's how you say it, Hihiro Zabimaru, isn't actually his real Bankai. And then we get to see his real Bankai, and we hear the reasoning of why Zabimaru didn't show him the real Bankai, and it's because he didn't think he was ready. He didn't respect him enough. And I think a lot of people were mad about it. I remember reading some of the discussions, and a lot of people were mad about it, but I think it perfectly fits with how Zabimaru is. Zabimaru seems to be this expression of self-criticism that's within Renji. And also a challenge to his pride. This combination of these two things, which I think is very, very interesting about Renji as a person, that is how his Zanpakuto choose comes out. Almost as this, literally as a thing to criticize him, to force him to be better. It's very similar to White in that way, although White is a bit more brutal about it. And that's just fascinating to me. I could ramble on and on about more examples of Zanpakuto from Bleach and how they relate to their characters, but I think I'll stop the rambling because this isn't very structured. Another good example I'm going to take I'm going to take with My Hero Academia, a more recent one, relatively. And My Hero has a wonderful choice of dynamics with its power system, of it choosing two avenues of how to use its power system in a narrative and character sense. Number one, how much the power system really affects the world building. If anything, all of the world building has its foundation in the quirk system. So from the ground up, the power system is one of the most important aspects of the world building of My Hero. And it's really fucking good. It just really works. Even if you don't like the story of My Hero, just the world building of it with how it constructs a society around everyone having powers is super interesting. It's genuinely well thought through, and I love it. It's great. And the second thing that the power system in My Hero does, I think I can get more in specific examples, is how much a person's power can affect their personality when they develop it, which is a very interesting conversation. Bakugo is one of the most interesting examples, in that, arguably, if he hadn't developed the quirk that he did, he probably would have developed into a much less prideful person. I think he'd probably still end up being aggressive, just from how his mom seems to be. But I don't think he'd be a bully in the way he ended up coming out as. And so there's something very interesting going on there, where Bakugo's explosion power incentivizes him to become more and more aggressive and more bombastic. And we can see similar things happen. There's a lot of other characters that kind of don't get much. I'll go with a specific example of a character that doesn't appear for long, but I still love her, which is La Brava, the partner of Gentle Criminal. I don't think they point it out, but there's something super interesting going on with her, where because her power is reliant on needing a romantic partner in order to function, that incentivizes her to go out of her way to get a romantic partner, to kind of, anytime she feels even the slightest bit of connection, to fall head over heels as deep as possible. I think that's something that's really sad, but also makes a lot of sense, like, from the way that what her situation is. Like, if you have a power that relies on having someone you love, then you're probably going to chase love way harder than a normal person would, which is what she did, and caused her a lot of problems until she met Gentle. And I love that piece of, like, character development. I love power systems in general that kind of lend to character development in one direction or another. It's really, really, really good. Another example of something like this. Another example, as I repeated that, I'm bad at this, is of Twice, the villain. Rest in peace. His entire shtick of being able to duplicate himself and others is a really strong power. Really strong. But the duplicating is a bit too good, as we saw in his backstory, where when he duplicated himself, the duplicates of himself all would believe that they were the real one. And we know how that ended. All the clones and the real one fighting each other until everyone but one died. And the experience of that happening, of him killing so many of himself, and the uncertainty that lies in such a concept, just destroyed him. And I can't blame him. And again, we can see how a concept of a power in My Hero can thoroughly impact the way your mind develops. Sometimes over time, gradually, but sometimes even in instances of using your power, like with Twice, where ever since that day, Twice has just been permanently fucked up, where he can't even go too long without wearing his mask, because he'll split apart. And again, I love the consistency in character writing here. The idea of so many characters being forced to, like, grow up and live with these concepts. It just makes so much sense to how they end up the ways they are. Another example of this, while you can't pinpoint, this isn't as strong as a correlation, but I still think it's worth pointing out, with someone like Eraserhead, who's, like, fairly quiet, doesn't say much outside of when he needs to say things, and he says everything he needs to say like a badass. His power of being able to negate other powers, I think you can make an argument that that's influenced a lot of his attitudes and how he interacts with other people, and how his dynamics are with other people. Because it's like, why would he be threatened? Why would he really feel a genuine threat from most, when, as long as he's worked on himself physically enough that he can put up a good fight in like a straight hands battle with no powers involved, as long as he has that down, which he does, then he doesn't really need to fear other people with quote-unquote better powers. And I think that helps kind of lay the foundation for a lot of his attitude, a lot of his way of engaging with other people. And due to the fact that his power is best for these quick engagements and best used for strategy, it kind of lends itself for him to become more tactically minded, for him to become more and more subtle in how he approaches things, and that it's like, yeah, obviously he doesn't want to be too heavily known, because if everyone knows how his powers work, they're just going to spam and with Eraserhead, it isn't as easy to pick on to, mostly because he's already an adult, he's already been through a lot of things, so a lot of that can easily be chalked up to a number of other variables. But still, I think it's worth pointing out that you can see a lot of connections between his power and the
The spirits of the forest awaken.
And, well, there's a lot more examples of my bleach on right here that I can talk about. I have kind of hit a normal kind of limit with how long audios go, so I'll stop here.
Nice.